Hello, welcome to It Ain't New, the show that represents the history of ethnic minority groups in the USA and where knowledge becomes power. If you don't know, now you know. We're Nyke,
Bella,
Estar,
your very real hosts. Thing that like you kind of keep putting this in there, so of course they're going to think that because you're going to keep telling them that.
Right.
Or even if you look at kind of one of the things that happened with even the LA riots between Blacks and Koreans, a lot of people were perceiving Koreans as like, you guys are coming in and you're taking the money out of the Black community and you're doing this. Now, there were some people that, but you're also forgetting the fact that, like, one, banks were not giving loans to Black people. And then when they were giving loans to Koreans, they were purposefully doing it at higher interest rates. And on top of that, saying you can't even put your store in a predominantly white wealthy community. So where else
red zoning
are you gonna go?
The term is red zoning.
Exactly.
And redlining.
But again, they're not going to tell the Black people that.
Oh no.
And then they're not going to tell the Asians that, like, this is what's happening. Like,
and
this is why they don't like you. And then of course people are trying to pretty much, like, it's more of a protective measure of like, well, we're gonna do stuff that's like insular and everything.
It's a survival thing at that point.
But it's like no one's getting these, things across. So
actually from that, I want to dive into, when did this term actually come about and why, for political reasons, for social political reasons to be exact. And so one thing that I will say right now, Asian Americans were first and foremost never perceived to be fully Americans.
Even sometimes still not.
Yeah. And I'm not quoting, but I am directly thinking about all the immigration exclusion acts that this country has, which, by the way, if you don't know about them, please read up on them. There's so many immigration exclusion acts. But the one I'm really thinking about is like late 1800s. I want to say even early 1900s. I can't remember exactly which one. But if you read into it, you have an entire country called China with how many billions of people? And you're only allowing 105 to immigrate to the U.S. every year.
And not to mention that at the time, they were only allowing men. So it was only Chinese men coming over.
And I think Japanese nationals were only, I think it was like the quota was something like 90, which, by the way, also included Korean nationals because Japan had colonized Korea at that time.
Yep.
So those were the two highest numbers. And you have an entire continent where you're just like, oh, we really don't want you, but we can't outright ban you. So we're going to lower all these numbers.
This was also the time that the term white to become for white people was starting to become a thing as well.
This was also where we start hearing about race, specifically in the terms that we're talking about today. White, Black, Asian, red-skinned, all
because
that.
at one point, like, Irish people, Jewish people were not considered white.
They were not.
And guess where they were being hired and guess where they were doing stuff? At HBCUs. Woo!
Guess what's even funnier? When the U.S. was building their freaking freaking continental railroad,
right?
East Coast was all Irish, right?
Yep.
West Coast was all Chinese. Why? It got real expensive for them to hire Irish laborers because they kept dying from lack of food and not knowing how to handle dynamite. Whereas Chinese laborers, cheap.
Yep.
And we know how to handle dynamite, and we eat more veggies than we do meat.
Yep.
So that meat is not going to rot as fast. Like, we, for various reasons, did not die as fast or as readily.
You know what's also sad? I'm literally thinking of reading some of the like conquistador like journals when they were talking about the transatlantic slave trade and even other people. And literally one of the reasons why they particularly took African and also natives, because a lot of people forget that natives were also slaves here, was because they literally, one of them saw an African woman. She was, I can't remember what they were all working on something in, like, of course, like agriculture at the time. She goes into the woods and he literally follows her like into the woods. She goes into the woods, has her baby,
comes back out,
literally picks up the baby and comes back out.
Keeps working.
and keeps working. So they were like, oh, wait, you mean they don't have to be like laid up for...
Oh, you mean they don't have to be like secluded
Right.
in their rooms for 3 months because you can't see anybody before and you can't see anyone after, which was very I would say very European 1400s
Very
through
Victorian.
18.
Yeah.
Oh, even earlier than that. And that was all the royals that were doing this shit.
Yeah.
Because they could be the ones that could be laid up. Someone else would clean out their, like, you know, all that stuff. But, okay.
If you don't think that this is relevant to now, check out the news where in Florida, because of everything that Ron DeSantis is trying to do there's actually been a huge flight of undocumented people out of Florida.
And and African Americans.
And
too.
African Americans.
Yeah,
And guess what?
secretly.
It's paid for by the Florida government.
Well, that's not where I was going with this, but my point is that because of this flight, there are now crops and farms and all these sort of like Walmart doesn't have enough employees
Yep.
to keep the stores open. And the flip side of that is like we were talking about, you know, like Irish laborers and Chinese laborers being cheaper back then. Now they're complaining in Florida, like employers in Florida are complaining that the people that they're bringing in to replace everyone who's left, essentially like white workers, aren't as good, aren't as fast, and cost more.
Sounds like Germany, doesn't it?
Man, like, and this is why we run this podcast, because history really does repeat itself, and if you don't know it, it's happening now.
And if you're blind to it and you're complicit, I'm sorry, you're part of the problem.
Are you really sorry?
No.
Sorry, not sorry.
But you know what I mean? Like, I'll look them dead in the eye and be like, you're part of the problem.
Correct.
And it's also really like ignorance is not bliss.
Ignorance is not
Like,
cute either.
It's not necessarily like you're stupid. There's
No.
a difference between stupidity and ignorance.
Right.
And in ignorance, it really is you don't know, but it just because you don't know doesn't mean that you should not learn.
Right. But so I'm okay with people not knowing and then finding out and then changing their behavior. What I'm not okay with is people finding out and then being like, well, that's just how things are.
Like Maya Angelou said, if you know better, do better.
Maya Angelou, the queen. But so actually, like, what was the political reasoning behind this particular term, model minority? Because when I started reading about it, I was ready to like...
It's a justification.
Yeah.
It's a justification that is a smokescreen to hide other more baser reasons for excluding and including certain groups of people.
Right. So when that part that you're talking about, like excluding and including, right? But including to what extent? Because excluding is straight up, we don't want you, right? But including, because I think what a lot of Asian Americans tend to not realize is like, there is a sense of, oh, we're honorary white.
I call it white adjacent.
Yes. And
Ain't
we're
no honor in honorary white.
well, yeah, if you weren't here, I did also put like air quotes around that. Cause like, ugh. But like, we're allowed to be in certain spaces and then we're also passed over in those certain spaces where like, I find myself when that happens, I'm like, do I really want to be here? Do I really in this space? Am I actually being, you know, truly me? Am I, you know, being seen for who I really am, or am I just you just fill the quota of the diversity quota here?
Yeah, and I mean this is why even when they started to make this, I was looking back at again the term for Black people. Oh my goodness, it has changed so much, and it was like, it was you know, seeing all of this happen literally throughout history. It's kind of like, why were they changing the term?
Yeah, because
like why what?
Well, what are some of those terms?
So the first term, of course, was African. But what was interesting was that a lot of the natives that they were running in were literally described as looking African. So
because they're darker skinned.
Yeah. Not only that, but also hair texture. So
that
if
is
you
a very indigenous thing, though.
Yeah, if
curly hair is an indigenous hair texture.
Yes, and if you actually go back to like even go to places in like Massachusetts, and you go to, especially on, I can't believe that it's still called this, but especially on the Mohawk Trail.
I love it. Please do keep the name.
When you go, I mean, they kept it for a reason, but when you go like back to those places and you actually look in some of the stores that have like historical artifacts, those people are black. I mean, like the actual color, black, curly hair. Like, you're like, wait, is this really what, like, is this actually native? No, that's what they look like. And even when they called people red face, they called them red face, not necessarily because of their skin tone. Some of them did have like more red skin, but it was because some of these tribes would literally take red clay from the ground, and that would be a part of their dress. It had nothing necessarily to do with like skin tone
Bronze
for the,
skin.
yeah.
All of
So
it was
the
just
lighter
a dividing
skin,
thing.
which is why that whole debate of whether Amanda Stenberg should have been in Black Panther or not, and all that craziness. A lot of the lighter skin tones came from mixing, whether it was wanted or not. But yeah, like it's like you get African, and then actually American was used back then for particularly natives.
Right.
Then of course when there were more white people, they were like, we got to call it, we're all Americans. Like, are you really? Then after that, then they started calling them Negro. So let me go back actually. Colored was before Negro. And the reason why they called them colored was literally, it was supposed to be white and other. So it was white and colored. This is why everyone else, even if you were not necessarily African, was included in that category.
Which is also why we call it people of color.
So you get this colored category, but then of course in the colored category, now you've got people actually fighting back and going to law on this. And then they're also trying to change the laws to particularly exclude people.
Which I think you could trace that back to even the revolution.
Yes.
Because
Oh.
those laws were,
Yeah.
3/5 is not enough.
Exactly. But so now you've got colored, and then within colored, people are now fighting back. And then of course, you now have to separate between the coloreds because these folks, we might want to include them, but but not so much, not so much. Just include them in some of the things.
Always a minority.
Right.
You want to
include them in some of the things.
But it's like, what benefits do you get out of including them?
Well,
which is also where
there's exactly. There's a lot of there's a reason why colorism was a thing, even particularly in the 1800s and the 1900s, and even now, but definitely more so then. So you get to people who are, getting better education, they're getting this. You're actually letting them have their land, because my family on both sides literally had their land stolen. Like all throughout my indigenous folks and the freed, not slaves, got their land taken, right? Still ain't got none of that back, except for some of the ones in Arkansas. But am I really trying to move to Arkansas? No. Not necessarily because of what Arkansas is, but just there's nothing down there right now. Yeah. So again, we get from colored. Then of course, because people are splitting up the coloreds, now everybody has to have a category.
Right.
So, what did they call? Well, what is black? You can't really call them black, right? You can't really call them black. So of course, Negro. But Negro is literally just Spanish for black. And that actually came from a lot of the stuff. Yeah. If you wonder where, a lot of the Afro-Brazilians come from, it was also slavery.
That's literally how an entire continent of people got shipped around the entire globe.
Exactly. So we've got now, within the coloreds, everybody's got their own category, right? Mind you, the natives actually had to be on a scroll. That's a whole other, So now that's where Negro comes in. And then on Negro, so mind you, my great grandmother's birth certificate has Negro on it. my great grandfather's enlistment for the United States Union Army
Yep.
has mulatto on it because his father was white.
Woo.
Okay, so now again, these categories, they even had a category called octoroon.
Okay, my brain right now is like, okay, mulatto, I've heard that term, and I have certain not so great feelings about it, but I understand where it comes from.
Well, no, it comes from the word mule.
Yeah.
Because they literally wanted them to not procreate.
But also, I think the Spanish actually started using that in Mexico first, where they're like, again, they literally saw Africans and slaves as property, and they were like, well, you're not human, so we're going to call you animal.
And they wanted them to not procreate because mules cannot procreate. Like you have to make a mule, but a mule cannot make another mule.
Yeah, so it's what? A horse and a donkey makes a mule.
And it has to be specific. One of them has to be
I think it's
like
the female has
the
to
female
be...
has to be a horse, I think. Yeah, in order for you to make a mule. But again,
it's
octoroon was a category that was used to describe someone who had 1 out of 8 grandparents who was African or black. So everyone else was white and they still would not consider them white.
So this is actually more of a lead up to what eventually would become like the voting laws.
Yes, because that's why,
the grandfather
especially
voting
in
laws.
the South, when they had the grandfather clause, they were literally, black people were showing up like, okay,
even if
like,
you're
what?
Yeah, so even if you're a fraction, like a fraction, not like half, literally a tenth at this point.
Oh no, that's
An
where
eighth.
that's where even the slave law where they said,
Oh, you're a bad Asian. You did bad math right there.
right.
Well, no, that's literally. I was like, wait a minute. She said octa.
Yes, you're an eighth. Yes, but even
I take the bad Asian very seriously now. Like I will continue to be a bad Asian because I see that as a rebel. Ooh.
right. But even with octoroon, that was a whole thing. They literally started changing laws to try and exclude black people, particularly from voting, and it was like,
Still going on?
what? Like how is that? Okay. Yeah. Anywho, then after you get Negro, now you get into the Black Power movement. During the Civil Rights,
The Pan-African.
So yes, so a lot of them are like, why are we using these terms that you are giving us? And then even for using Black Power, that was not necessarily to associate themselves with a color. It was to associate themselves with all other people who would probably be of Afro descent.
Because what color is black?
Thank you.
It
And
includes
actually,
every color.
There was I can't remember what ethnicity he is, but there is an Asian comic who literally, I have to like
what
follow
nationality?
him some more. Yeah, I can't remember what nationality he is. But I remember he was talking. He was like, "We're all just lighter and darker shades of brown. Like, what are these colors?"
Unless if you literally had no brown in your beige.
Thank you. I'm like, what? But I was like, you are so right. But yeah, so that's where the term black came from. This is why a lot of people would actually rather call themselves black versus calling themselves African American.
Yeah.
But I
learned that from you, Nyke.
Yay.
I've heard that actually, even if you go back, 1 or 2 generations above us, right? There's this feeling of like, but black is not a good term.
No, exactly. And that's another thing too, where it's like during the Black Power movement, people were concerned with that color because it's like black is darkness, black is bad. When we watch movies,
Black is Lucifer.
Literally all of the people that are bad are in black.
Or they're Russian.
Yeah, they're Russian and they're dressed in black. But literally, like, they're always in black. So it's like we're associating ourselves with something that's always going to be wrong.
Right.
And that also goes back into, like, what I'm going to mention later. But, yeah, it's like, so a lot of people had issues with it, but there really was no other choice. Because a lot of people were like, it's not that we don't accept our African ancestry if we really had that. That's why I'm like, even going into my history, like, I know there were Moors in Mexico and that's where my great grandmother came from. Like, I know that. But again, it's kind of like, so I would call them more, that's why I use the term more Afro than I do African. Because again, it's kind of like there are people who are actually African.
Right.
And there's a whole culture in that. And then even deeper based on what country you're from as well. Because my Ethiopian friends are very different from my Nigerian friends.
Yeah.
Like completely different landscape, completely like
the mentality is different,
and from the Congo and from Tanzania. It's very different. There are similarities, of course,
right?
But again, a lot of the similarities came in being Black African, like literally. Even when you go into Africa, it's like,
or even who colonized them, and how were they split up? What tribe were they part of?
Exactly.
All of that plays into it. But at the same time, like that comes from trauma that was dealt by the Europeans.
Exactly. So this is why people hold on more so to the term Black, even though it does have all those like terrible connotations and other things.
But I think like what is more recent to our generation, right, is this like, oh, Black is a positive thing. Mm-hmm. So that's
again came out of the Black Power movement, and then the 70s. The 70s was an interesting time for Black people. Well, very interesting.
I say
Love
that
the confidence.
I say that because I don't see the same thing happening for yellow. I'm just saying.
Again, that's another thing that I found interesting too, because the Yellow Power movement, and I don't know what was going on in the 60s and 70s, but we were on fire during that time. Actually, no, I do know what happened.
The Pan-Asian movement took a lot of inspiration from the Pan-African movement, but
as it should.
Yes, it should. But I think what happened was also we're caught in between, right? We're caught at the, like we were talking about earlier, there is that like we want to be that model minority. Mm-hmm. We want to be the ones that don't get into trouble. We don't have the power to fight back. What do? Assimilate? But what side do you assimilate to?
Again, that's what I'm saying. I was like, no, I do know what happened. Thank you all for listening to It Ain't New, where if you don't know, now you know. We're Nyke,
Bella,
Estar.
Please show us some love on Spotify by leaving us a rating or a review, and join our Patreon so we can grow and continue to give you all wonderful content.